Hello, and welcome to the Office of the Patriot. If you are a returning viewer, welcome back, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Myron Ybarra, and I'm your host. Within the last 20 years, I've seen a pretty significant ideological divide happen within the United States. At first, it just started with political party, conservatives against liberals, but then morphed into racial and ethnic division, and now more recently, division based on gender and sexual orientation. Given that the United States is a land of immigrants, very little history is shared culturally between one another. We often praise the idea that our diversity is our strength, and to a certain degree, that is true. However, with political and social tides moving us all in different directions, I believe it's time to find commonality again. Well, how do we do that? I believe we should adopt the English language as the official national language of the United States. Well, this idea is nothing new, however. Establishing a national language has been tried a few times through proposed constitutional amendments and legislative writ. However, these efforts have been unsuccessful as a result of significant resistance, both political and social. Those against having a national language fear that non-English speaking people, and there are about 7 million of these people in the United States now, and it's growing at an alarming rate, these people will be unable to obtain government services or engage in business if a national language is adopted. It's also believed that having a national language would be a violation of the 14th Amendment and due process clauses of the United States Constitution. However, these are not the main arguments against adopting English as a national language. The most common argument I hear is that it would remove the culture of the 300 plus languages that are spoken by all the people in the United States today. So let's dissect each of these arguments in the order presented. Currently, 31 states have adopted English as their official state language. If these adoptions were in violation of the United States Constitution, under the 14th Amendment, they wouldn't have been able to institute having official state languages. In these states, people living within that do not speak English still have access to all government services and are still able to conduct business. Unfortunately, though, this has come at a high cost to taxpayers for these accommodations. To complicate matters, non-English speaking citizens hamstring themselves by not speaking English, given that over 95% of Americans and English speaking immigrants, both legal and illegal, conduct public, private, and government business in English. Their illiteracy makes their day-to-day living tasks much more difficult for them and the people they interact with. The next argument, culture, is one that's pretty easily debunked. Merriam-Webster defines culture as the customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits of racial, religious, or social groups. Language does not fall into any of these categories. Simply, language is sounds or forms that have a defined meaning that is understood by a specific group of people. Language is a mechanism to convey culture, such as how people live, how they worship, what they eat, how they celebrate. But language in and of itself is not culture. Truth be told, the only language that has a cultural component is the language of the deaf, like American Sign Language or CSign. Languages of the deaf have milestones that are earned by the student that are specific to people who are deaf or those that hear but have learned the language and are accepted by the deaf community. All other languages are just modes of transmission of culture and thought, not culture in and of themselves. So why should we have a national language then? Well, that's pretty simple, really. The United States is primarily made up of immigrants, with all the cultures, languages, and other barriers that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. Not to mention the ideological divide I spoke about earlier. As a country, we need something now more than ever than just the idea of freedom and prosperity to bring us closer together. I remember in school, elementary school, learning about the United States being a melting pot of people. Later, that theory was changed to the idea that the people were a mixed salad. The reasoning was that a melting pot inferred that all the cultures merged together to become uniquely American, which really wasn't totally the case. However, neither was the idea of a salad, because while we have individual ethnicities and cultures that can be easily defined, much like a salad, we also have some things that were taken from these immigrants and made uniquely American. So I look at the United States as being a stew. You can see the individual cultures blending together to make something uniquely American, but still maintaining their individual cultural identity. The gravy of this stew are the raw ingredients that were combined and are now uniquely American, like baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet, as well as freedom and liberty. I believe now it's time to add language to this recipe. By giving the people of the United States a common language and only using this language for the purposes of government and public and private business, we do away with the distrust that language, outside of the ones that we're comfortable with, always instill. As I've said in prior episodes, it's always easier for me to explain when I go from the macro to the micro. And in this case, I will use a scenario that I believe most everybody at one time or another has experienced. So it's late in the evening and you need to stop off at a local 7-Eleven or Circle K or liquor store to pick up a 6-pack of soda and a bag of chips, or a 6-pack of beer and a bag of chips for a get-together you've been invited to. You walk into the store and there's no other customers, rather. Inside, it's just you. And there are two people behind the counter who are standing there. They are of a different ethnicity or race than you are, and they're speaking to each other in a language that you don't understand, all the while looking at you make your selections. So how do you feel about this? Does it bother you? Well, most of the people I've talked to replied in the affirmative to both of those questions. You see, a society that endorses speaking multiple language also endorses the result, which is alienating Americans from one another. And in my humble opinion, not having English as our national language does more to divide Americans than the current crop of corrupt politicians and leftist media outlets do with their pigeonholing of people based on their ethnicity, their race, their creed, their sexuality, or political affiliation. By making English the federal national language and mandating that all public and government transactions be conducted in this language, Americans of all cultures, races, and ethnicities will be able to demonstrate to one another that they are Americans first. Again, I want to thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed the content, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing my channel. Your patronage is always appreciated. Thank you so much, and as always, have a blessed day and stay safe out there.